Good morning and welcome to the Bureau webinar, Why Cat Plus is Here to Stay. I'm Kate Quillen, I'm the Marketing Manager for Bureau, and I'm joined by a fantastic panel of experts this morning. Just before I hand over to them, I'm just going to quickly run through the format for this morning. We are going to have a 40 to 45 minute discussion with a slideshow, and then we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of time for questions, finishing around 10. Just another couple of things. You can submit your questions using the icon at the bottom of your screens. We'll also be running a couple of polls throughout the webinar. We'd really appreciate your participation, and those are anonymous. Also, when we finish the webinar, there'll be a very brief survey, so if you wouldn't mind filling that in, we'd really appreciate the feedback, and again, that is anonymous. We're recording the webinar, and I'll share that with you by email. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Mae Fahzi. Over to you, Mae.
Good morning. Thank you, Kate. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mae Fahzi. I'm the Interior Architecture Director at MF Design Studio, and I specialize in workplace interiors. This year has been a hot year, hot topic, the whole workplace and going back to the workplace, and excited to be talking about the Cat A+ model. Over to you, Katrina.
Morning. My name is Katrina Love. I've worked in the central London office market for 10 years, the last 9 at Colliers. I spent the first 4 years of that doing purely tenant rep work, so mainly acquisitions for occupiers. And for the last 5 years, I've concentrated mainly on landlord work, but still run a few acquisitions along the side. So very much active in the Cat A+ market right now in London.
Thanks, Katrina. Good morning, everyone. My name's David Bell. I'm the Commercial Director with Bureau Workspace. First of all, thank you to all of you for attending this morning. I'd also like to say a special thanks to our 2 guests for joining us. Both Katrina and Mae have a wealth of experience around the topic of Cat A+, both on the brokering deals side of things and also the designing of the Cat A+ solutions. So it'll be great to have your input as we go through the course of the session. Just to give you a little bit of background in terms of why we decided that it would be worthwhile having you all on here today to talk about this subject. Firstly, just a little brief bit of background about Bureau. Bureau Workspace, we're a UK workspace solutions business. We have a number of different services that we offer our clients. We have a Bureau Move-in, which is our moves and relocations arm of the business. We also have Bureau Protect, which is assisting our clients in making a safe return to the workspace as and when time permits, offering a number of products and services around that. But we're most commonly known for workspace furniture consultancy and procurement. We're deeply passionate about learning about the role of the office and understanding how the role of the office is evolving. In recent years, we've seen a dramatic rise in the volume of flexible workspace that has been occurring not just across the UK, but across the globe. And more recently in particular, we've seen a significant rise in Cat A+ solutions. This trend's led us as a business to carrying out extensive research around the topic. We've been engaging with consultants across the industry, across the UK for a number of months now, getting their input on this emerging trend. And that's what's led us here today to talk to you about this. There's a range of topics that we are going to go through with you. We're going to give you a bit of a definition just to kick us off in terms of what Cat A+ is, because we recognize that there are a few variances around what Cat A+ is described as. We'll then go into a bit about the origins of Cat A+ and why that has emerged as a growing movement across the country. We'll also look at the design process. So Mae is going to talk us through that. And then we're going to have a little bit of a delve into how the sort of contracts between the landlord and the occupier operate, why they're a bit different from the traditional lease contracts that you see, And then we're going to look at the return on investment side of things. What sort of return on investment are landlords recognizing, and what are the benefits to the occupiers as well when they look at this? And then we'll touch on what the future has in store for Cat A plus. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. So in terms of how we define Cat A plus, most of you who are familiar with it will know it referred to most commonly as plug and play. It sits between the Cat A and the Cat B fit out, and it's landlord led, where they will invest in the fit out of the space, the M&E, the connectivity to the space, and also the furniture. And that basically enables that space to be ready so that if an occupier comes in and they want to move into that space tomorrow, that space is ready for them to move into. It's generally single occupier, so that's probably one of the key differences between co-working or serviced office spaces where you would have hundreds of occupiers in one building. This generally is for one tenant. Katrina, in terms of sort of typical size ranges of Cat A plus, what have you been seeing in the market?
It's more common, well, in London, it's definitely more common for offices of 5,000 square feet or less. I would say if you've got an office around the 3K mark, you would absolutely fit it out right now in a typical building. There are examples and good examples of larger Cat A plus offerings, and I think we'll see more of them coming up to compete with the increase in tenant space that we've got. There's just such an abundance of tenant space come to our market that it seems the most viable option to compete with them. I think at the moment, we are 75% up on sublease space in the year to date from last year.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably one of the biggest bits of competition really for landlords when it comes to trying to attract occupiers. Why are you not seeing? Why are landlords currently not investing in larger spaces then for Cat A plus, do you think?
I think originally it's more difficult to predict how an occupier of that scale would occupy. Whereas when it's less than 5,000 square feet, there's more of a generic fit out that would suit most people. So I think that's been the main difficulty at the moment. It's different, I think, if you're in a city building where the floor plate's much larger and it's probably a trading floor, that would be more typical. But certainly in Mayfair, in the West End, our floor plates aren't usually that large. And I think you're safer to keep it to a smaller space for the time being.
Mm. And Mae, are you, I mean, in terms of Cat A plus, are you generally seeing that being a solution to floor plates that have been struggling to rent out? Is that kind of, or do you see it going beyond that?
Well, it started off, the first few ones that we have done were that situation where landlord felt, oh, that space has been sitting there, not really, there's not much interest in the space, and they started looking at fitting it out purely just to attract more people, and especially smaller companies who find it much easier to have a space that's, you know, occupation ready. So you take your keys and you move your laptops and computers and you're ready to go. But now I'm seeing it slightly being more spread out. It doesn't have to be a space that has been sat for a while, not being occupied. Actually, landlords are more interested, especially around London. We're doing quite a bit of it, and it's more of a trend. A lot of people and landlords who have smaller spaces are looking to create that opportunity to help attract more people into their spaces. Yeah.
So in terms of the origins of Cat A plus, I guess with some of the stats, I mean, in 2019, flexible workspace transactions accounted for 35% of commercial property deals. That's 85 million square foot of the UK office market, which is co-working, serviced office space. consisted of flexible office space. And Jones Lang LaSalle, they predicted there would be 10 million square foot of flexible office space added to major cities in the next 5 years. This was a pre-COVID forecast, I should say. In terms of some of the origins of Cat A plus, Mae, what are you seeing that's sort of driving the Cat A plus movement?
It's the speed, and smaller companies as well find it, I think, more convenient. When you think about the investment you have to make to turn a space from what is Cat A to a Cat B, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort, and also it's the amount of money invested to get the space ready for the occupier to move in. So from a smaller company perspective, it's the flexibility. You can, you know, just view the space and move in. It's ready for you. It's occupant ready and occupier ready, and that, I think, that makes a big difference. And also the lease, the length of the lease as well, which I'm sure Katrina can shed some light. You don't have to take a longer lease with Cat A plus. Where I'm seeing my landlords looking at much shorter tenancy period. Don't you think, Katrina, that's true?
Yeah, definitely in the past few years, but actually as a result of COVID, we've seen an increase in people pushing for shorter terms, which is why this space is becoming more popular, because companies who, you know, they don't know where they'll be in 5 years. There's so much uncertainty. They're not willing to spend the capex on a fit out. So it makes sense for them to take a fitted space and then for the landlord basically to factor that into the deal. So that's what we're seeing more of. I think originally the landlords were doing this to compete with the flexible offering. And now there's actually so much of it in our market, it's to compete with each other.
Do you think that the pandemic then is probably going to galvanize the need for Cat A plus when you talk about the, you know, the capex costs that a lot of occupiers have to spend to fit out and design a space?
I just don't think they're in a position to spend that now, Dave. They don't know what the future holds. There isn't the certainty that there was. Their growth projections have now been reduced. And so this offers the flexibility for them.
And what about risks? I mean, both for the landlord and the occupier, there must be some risks involved with looking at this type of model. Is there any that you would recognize, Katrina?
Yeah, I think for the landlord, you know, the fear is, what if I spend this money fitting out and it doesn't actually help? What if we're sitting here with a fitted space and we've spent it all ourselves? For the tenant, there's far less risk in this. Their biggest gripe would probably be that it's perhaps not exactly how they would have designed it, but I think the benefits outweigh the risk. And for the landlord right now, I think if you don't do this in the buildings that it's suitable for, I think the risk is your void period would be far greater.
So on to the design process. Mae, do you want to just talk us through typically in terms of a typical target audience for a Cat A plus model?
Yeah, it does vary, and it depends on the area, the type of building, the look of the floor plate, and the location. All of those in the mix actually inform us to who we're designing for or who we are trying to target. And from a design perspective, I think our biggest point is we need to design it speculatively on behalf of the landlord. We need to try and address the tenant's requirements. So when they come in to view the space, they feel that it's perfect. This is exactly what we want. So trying to work all of those elements to come up with a design that has got the character and personality, but also at the same time is generic. So you know, people are genuinely attracted to it. I think that's the biggest challenge, because you don't have the end occupier in the process. So you're trying to work on their behalf, although you're not 100% informed on, you know, who it's going to be for sure. But you can work around the actual industry itself. So we know that certain parts of London, let's say, the city is more finance, insurance. So when you have that in mind, you think about the look and feel. You think about what they might want to have within their space and design on their behalf. And the process goes hand in hand working with agents. So I would work with Katrina on what she thinks the target occupier would be, and then gauging with her experience on what the tenants would be looking at when they visit the space, and trying to create that you know, nice attractive environment. It's got to be very attractive. It's got to work hard to make sure it works for the tenant, and at the same time present itself well with features, but take away any very particular personality to make sure it appeals.
I guess that's probably one of the key differences here as well, is that the decision makers are different, you know, from what you would see on a normal Cat B fit out. Katrina, do you find yourself being a decision maker when it comes to these types of projects?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the landlord, the agent, and the designer, because some landlords are very specific about what they want in their building, although they'll take your advice. The agent should certainly have enough experience to be advising what they should have in terms of meeting rooms, desks, don't overpack the floor. And then you've got Mae, who can give advice on how you actually then put that into the design for that specific space. So it's more of a collaboration between everyone.
Mm. And Mae, typically, what sort of features, amenities would you tend to see in a typical Cat A plus project?
So collaboration spaces are huge in the Cat A plus project. And as Katrina said, what we try to avoid is packing out and max packing the space with desks. It doesn't present itself well. And I think especially after COVID, a lot of occupiers are now thinking, we come to the office not just to sit at a desk, we come to the office to interact with others and have conversations and meeting spaces. So the informal breakout areas, the informal meeting spaces form a big part. We always add meeting rooms within the space as well, because we know we cannot avoid, especially again after COVID, we're seeing a little more of the one-to-one meeting rooms. So you can actually take your laptop and go and do a quick Zoom call or a Teams call, which we're all doing a lot more of now. So desking, of course, we have the open plan, but collaboration spaces play a really important role.
Yeah, and sustainability is a topic that Bureau as a business is heavily involved in at the moment. It's something that's growing and growing and is becoming more important to businesses. Is that something you're seeing featuring in design at all when it comes to Cat A plus?
It does feature in the design, and actually as a model itself, Cat A plus sounds a lot more environmentally friendly than others, and it's purely because we're not doing dilapidations after each tenant moving out. So the landlord makes good the space and then it's ready for the next tenant. Whereas with the Cat B, let's say, turning a space from pre-occupied. So if you have an occupier who moved out, you have to take the space back to Cat A. And then we come in with a Cat B design, which maybe doesn't tie up with the Cat A. So you start taking out new ceiling tiles, new carpets, and that all goes to, you know, to be recycled, or even to some of it to waste. And I think the model itself lends itself to be really lean on materials and very lean on sustainability as well. So you are genuinely not throwing out as you would have in different models. And of course, with specification, we do consider the environment, so try and put recyclable content in, lots of recyclable materials, and genuinely just acknowledge sustainability, because it's big on many companies' agenda. And again, that will be a very good selling point to a space if you know that it has been considered during the design and the construction processes.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from a furniture perspective, we're looking at how we can maximize the lifespan of the furniture. And we'll often encourage the client to impose furniture maintenance agreements into the terms with the occupier, so that any wear and tear, you know, we can actually then repair that item of furniture as opposed to actually swapping it out. So you're maximizing the lifespan of it, minimum lifespan really of around 10 years or so. Whereas I guess with traditional leases, you might see some clients who might actually look at refreshing sort of every 5 years. In terms of the last question I just had on this then was around branding and personalization of space. Katrina, you touched on it earlier on. But I mean, are you seeing much in the way of that? Does the client, the occupier, have much leeway around branding and personalization?
They can certainly come into the space and make their own amendments to it, as long as they're not doing anything structurally. I think the whole point of this is to give them the basis of it. Here's the space, and there shouldn't be a lot to do. But in terms of branding, yes, they're free to do what they like.
Yeah.
If a tenant is involved in the process of the design, as in they've let us know they're interested in the space before we've actually started the works, then there's always the option for them to have input in that.
Okay, and one question actually worth asking is average cost per square foot, Mae. What are you seeing? I mean, if you look at the sort of the full offering of fit out, design, furniture, project management, etc., what's a typical cost per square foot that you're seeing right now?
So again, it depends on the location, because you're trying to cater for the end occupier, and it varies from one area to another. But I think if we say, we always propose the bronze, gold, silver and gold options, and I would say you could quite easily go between £45 a square foot up to potentially £85 a square foot. So that's average. You could go below or above, but that's what I'm seeing a lot more of. And these are the kind of budgets we're working with at the moment on a lot of our projects with the Cat A+ model.
Yeah. North of the border in Scotland, we've started to see an increase in the interest around Cat A+. We've been involved in a few recently, and typically budgets that we're seeing slightly less than what you would expect in London, but we've been seeing more recent examples ranging from anywhere from sort of £45 to £55 a square foot. So in terms of the lease agreements, prior to COVID, Katrina, what were the typical lease agreements that you were seeing, and how have they changed, I guess, since the pandemic's come about?
I think for the offices of 5K or less that we've been focusing on, you would have probably let the space on a 5-year lease with a break at 3. And now, post-COVID, many occupiers are pushing for a break at 2. So we're seeing people pushing for a lot more flexibility, and landlords willing to concede that break to get the space let. So that's probably the main difference. We're certainly seeing COVID clauses inserted into leases, mainly centred around rent-free periods, in that if we enter another lockdown during a rent-free period, the rent-free period is halted and then recommences upon the lockdown being lifted. So lots of elements like that have been brought in. There's far more leases we're dealing with now that are for the Cat A. And so in those, we generally pre-agree the delapse amount, and then the furniture wear and tear, as you've said. So as long as there's no damage to that, it could just be your dilapidations. They're probably the main differences. Otherwise, the main features of the lease are a conventional lease.
Yeah, and these wear and tear clauses, I mean, we were chatting about this before, and it's almost a bit like a PCP agreement that you would have on a car. When the car comes to the end of its lease agreement, there's a wear and tear clause in there that you would have to pay for any sort of light damage or anything like that. I take that's a common clause that you're seeing in these agreements.
Yeah, and it's absolutely fair. If you expect a landlord to concede a break at the 2nd year, they shouldn't have to continually refurbish every 2 years. So when they make the investment in this fit out, we need to know that that will last for 10 years. And so when someone leaves, go back in, paint, clean the floor, and then use the furniture money to replace any furniture that's damaged.
Yeah. And around, well, I guess that links to dilapidations. I mean, is that the dilapidations that they're actually paying for, the wear and tear, or are there other dilapidation sort of clauses that come into these types of agreements?
Well, typically I don't get involved in an awful lot of the dilapidation side, but we generally have just a pre-agreed, this is what it will be for. If there's any damage out with that, then I think we would need to go back and renegotiate or pick that up, but that should all be contained in the lease. And to be honest, to date, this is all fairly new in the last few years that this has become more common. So I haven't seen any instances yet where there's been there's been any situation between a landlord and tenant who's vacated where there's been an issue on the condition they've left the office in.
Yeah. And in terms of, we talked around rent-free periods, but in terms of some of the other services that landlords are investing in, broadband obviously being one, making sure that the connectivity is all there prior to someone coming in. Is there anything in particular other than that you're seeing?
It's mainly that you need to have fibre, not just in the building, you need to have it on the floor. Occupiers need to be able to connect as soon as they're taking occupation of that space. That's the whole point of this being a benefit. They don't have the time to wait on leave agreements or, IT providers connecting them. They need to be able to come in and get going. So that's probably the main thing.
I think it's the attention to details as well. We get asked by landlords to have maybe air chargers at your desk. So trying to make the space as user-friendly as possible. Integration of little things and technology bits and pieces that help the prospective tenant walking in thinking, oh, that space is great, it works really well. So I think the attention to details on certain aspects of the fit out plays a really important role, and it definitely does make a difference and attract.
Yeah, one thing that Bureau actually has been involved in recent months within our Protect side of the business is around air purification, and we've actually been involved in a couple of Cat A+ projects recently where the landlord is actually looking at investing in systems solutions like this. Really as a way of again giving the occupier confidence that every measure has been taken to make the space as safe as possible once their staff enter it. So you actually now, instead of actually seeing HVAC systems built into the air conditioning units of the building, actually having these wall-mounted, neat-looking solutions that are actually very visible to the occupier, so that when the occupier actually comes in fact, in some cases, you're even seeing signage putting next to the air purification systems that actually says to the person, this is why this system's here, and this is the benefit that it's going to give to you. And that is the benefit being that it's eradicating any smells, any bacteria and viruses, including coronavirus. It's going to be interesting to see things like hand gels and things like that, if that's something that the landlords want to do as well, to help encourage people to come into the space.
Yeah.
So moving on to the return on investment, Katrina, I mean, prior to COVID, what typically, what typical sort of return on investments were landlords able to recognise with Cat A+?
I think the main benefit was probably the increase in the headline rent, but we had to do that we had to restructure the deal to reflect the money spent on fitting out. So there was an increase in rent. Typically, the offices we dealt with were between £5 and £10 a square foot extra, and then the rent-free period was significantly reduced. So it was more like 1 year for every guaranteed year of the term, whereas pre-COVID, a Cat A space would have been 2 to 2.4 months rent-free for every guaranteed year of the term. Now, with there being so much competition, not just from the flexi space, but now from each other landlord Cat A+ and tenant options, there's less of a premium for the space. You're more likely to pay the typical market rent. And rent frees are also pushing out post-COVID in our market. So a Cat A on its own, in the West End, you could justify, I think we're just there about 3 months now for every guaranteed year of the term, which is pretty punchy. But Cat A+ would still be less, but it's, I think if you were giving, what would I say, 15 months on a 5 years, I think if it was Cat A+, you would still probably be giving 7 or 8 months. The main investment now is minimizing your void. That's where the return's coming from, spending the money and minimizing the void.
Yeah. And Mae, what about yourself? I mean, what have you been seeing around return on investment with some of your clients in relation to Cat A+?
I think I completely agree with Katrina, because it's especially now, there's quite a lot of space out there that is unoccupied. And I'm seeing a lot of landlords actually in London to start with, but then quite a lot in Berkshire and in Surrey. We're doing quite a few schemes there as well, where landlords are very keen to adopt this model and take it forward on their spaces, just to make sure that they are, you know, giving that extra bit to make sure that tenants can actually come in and occupy their spaces, so trying to avoid the void spaces, as Katrina said, and trying to market it in a much more smart way, so that when somebody walks in, they feel, oh yes, that you know, that's a great space, we can see ourselves working here, and they, you know, it makes it a much more attractive opportunity from a landlord perspective. So we're seeing a bit of that in Surrey and around Berkshire as well.
Yeah. And I guess it's a bit of an unknown, but I mean, moving on to, well, sorry, actually, Katrina, we've actually included a few case studies here just to give a few examples of some of the Cat A plus fit outs that Colliers have been involved in. Do you want to just walk us through briefly some of the details?
Yeah, sure. So this one was done, we let this space in August last year for Long Martin. So it's space in Covent Garden, quite small floor. Well, actually this one's okay. This one's larger, 7.5. They decided to actually do the Cat A plus when the previous tenant exited. So this was rolled out immediately. This wasn't for a space that had been lying on the market for any period of time. And during the marketing campaign of this, we actually secured a tenant during that. So this is a good example of showing people what you can deliver and providing it. And actually there was no void period from completion of the works on this one. So it's a good example of that.
Yeah, and that's actually an important point that you just made there. When it comes to Cat A plus, I mean, how often are you seeing these investments made on a speculative basis, as opposed to bringing, you know, a tenant already being agreed to coming in?
More and more often, far more often now.
Yeah, I tend to agree. We always design for the unknown, and in very, very little cases we had to work with a prospect tenant, but most of the time it's speculative.
Yeah. I would say there are some buildings that you're less certain of what a client will want, and in that case, if you don't proceed with the work, the landlord might employ somebody like me to come up with the design, space plans and CGIs, and then we would use that as part of the marketing campaign. So we could say to someone, you know, once you've signed your agreement for lease, we can turn this space round for you in 8 weeks. And then the lease commencement is on completion of the works. So that's more common as well. And it's a route to consider if you're not sure of, you know, the layout and the design for each space. But now so many landlords are ready to go ahead. We're doing so much more speculative marketing of landlord Cat A plus space.
Okay. Do you want to just talk us briefly through this one?
Yeah, so this was another one that we done for GPE on Portman Square in Marylebone. We let the first few floors relatively quickly, and then on the remaining floors, most of the requirements seemed to be smaller. Originally, these floors were more like just over 5K. And so what we done was we actually split the floor and then started fitting them out. So you can see from this, marketing it on a Cat A basis, I think it was 9 months. In fact, some of the spaces were actually longer than that. And as soon as we started fitting them out, we started to get more interest. So we actually started the works on these fit outs end of 2018. And then the majority of them were let early 2019, with the last one going last summer. This is another good example, sorry, that previous one where we did get a premium on the rent. So 93.50, if that was Cat A, we were probably, I think we were quoting 85 with a view to doing somewhere in the 80s. And then we got 93.50 on it being let on a fitted basis.
And Farringdon Road?
Farringdon Road was done for CBRE, so it's a fringe location where these locations, I would say Farringdon, Clerkenwell, Shoreditch is probably where the Cat A plus started to become more popular originally in London, because it's where so many startups are located, and landlords obviously are trying to let the space. The startup companies certainly don't have the capex for fit out. Leases are typically shorter, and so this area, there's always been probably, I would say, a larger offering of Cat A plus, and so we had to compete with that. So we done this for CBRE GI. This one was done, I think it was last year. Yeah, last year. It was let at £60 a square foot, but this is another example of where the rent free is pushing out closer to market because there was so much competition of Cat A plus. So 5 years with a break at 3, the rent free was 6 months on the first 3 years, which actually at the time would have been a typical market rent.
It's interesting on this one, there's actually no carpet tiles down on that, I can see. Is that something that occurs quite a lot then with some of the Cat A plus projects that are...
It's a trendy look, isn't it? So yeah.
You see it more and more. I would say we see very little carpet now. There's lots of wood effect flooring, just rugs under boardroom tables or in certain breakout space. I can't remember the last time I walked in and I saw a new refurbishment that was all carpet.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, I agree.
No. Perhaps in a meeting room, but that's about it.
Yeah, when you need some acoustic qualities, but then in the open plan, it's really nice. It's a trendy look.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I guess that, you know, in terms of the future of Cat A plus, where do you see that sitting in the market then, Katrina?
I don't think it will change anytime soon. If anything, I think we're likely to see more product like this coming to the market. In Q1 next year, we're expecting even more tenant space to come to the market, and to compete with that and the existing Cat A plus offering, I don't think it's going anywhere soon. If anything, I think we'll see more of it.
Yeah.
When we look at the requirements that come out in our market on the Agent Society, the number now that say purely looking at fitted space has significantly increased.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, Mae, would you see, is there any types of sectors that Cat A plus just simply isn't really geared for at the moment?
I think purely dealing with quite a lot of hedge funds, doing a lot of projects for hedge funds, they are very particular about what they want in the space. And although they do occupy smaller floor plates, so 5,000 square foot would be the kind of average, because of how particular they are and how they wanted to present themselves, I don't see that this is probably the model they would happily take on. And again, it depends on the profile of the space, the profile of the building, and you know, how expensive the rent is within a building. Because if you are taking a very premium space, you want to tailor it to your needs. You want it to completely reflect your identity. So that becomes a little bit of a tricky one, even from a landlord perspective, to put the investment in a space that is very premium. I don't think that Cat A plus is quite suited to that yet. It could change in the future. But at the moment, it's more the generic spaces, generic buildings in particular parts of London, maybe Fitzrovia and Mayfair, not maybe that, you know, not that close in getting into the Cat A plus market. But yeah, I think it's more of a generic fit out that premium spaces and premium companies would want more identity and want more of their brand within this space.
I agree. We considered this for what we call a trophy building in Mayfair, a building owned by Ponte Gadea, which is mainly occupied by financials. You've got lots of private investment, private equity, hedge funds, and we thought about it, but the type of viewings we were doing differed and the occupiers were so different. So on one side of a floor, you know, you may have a trading floor, and on the other side, you might have a private family office that have 5 people and 2,000 square feet. And it was just too different to call it. So that was another example where we had a company come up with floor plans, CGIs, and we used that as a marketing tool to say, if you want us to do it, we can fit it out and we will restructure the lease to reflect the cost that the landlord's taken on. Interestingly, nobody wanted it in that building. They did all want to do their own fit out. So you need to be very careful.
Yeah. Law firms is another example as well. We dealt with a few where, again, privacy is very important. So you would want the space to be more cellular than your average Cat A plus fit outs. It's not just an open plan and meeting room. So again, a Cat A plus wouldn't go with heavy cellular offices as a law firm would. So then maybe that's not quite the right model. I think it needs to be kept more generic, more open plan. Startups are a great example of, this is a perfect space for them, because they don't have to go through the whole process, the lengthy process of design, and also the investment up front.
Yeah. And I appreciate that both of you are based in London, and probably don't necessarily have too much experience in some of the regional cities as you do for the London market. But I mean, when you look at other regional cities like Manchester, for example, or Edinburgh and Glasgow, that have strong tech sectors, very strong startup sectors, digital marketing, I mean, can you see the Cat Plus offering being something that would be ideally suited for those areas as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it will spread. It started off in London, but I believe that this will spread across, very similar to the serviced offices, which are popping around the entire country at the moment. And some people feel a little bit nervous occupying the space with multiple other occupiers using the same facilities, especially with COVID and everything else. So having your own space, but that has been, pre-designed, pre-fit for you, sounds like a very attractive idea. And as you said, it's the tech industry, and there's quite a lot of it up north around the Manchester area. I think it's definitely going to spread.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Well, that's me in terms of the questions. So thank you very much to both of you. Kate, we'll hand back to you.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions from our attendees. Some of these have been a little bit answered during the conversation, but maybe there's areas that the guys could expand on. So Roddy had asked from Form Design, I'd like to understand what advantages Cat Plus provides from a sustainability perspective, which we talked about. And is there a danger that we end up with very vanilla workspace that is safe and generic and not specifically beneficial to a tenant? Mae, do you want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge for designers in general. And although this is a very true point, we could end up with the vanilla spaces that have got very generic look and feel. But because there is this competition going on between landlords trying to get their spaces to be occupied quickly, what our brief is always, what can we do to make this space incredibly attractive, but also at the same time, you can't have a very controversial space. You can't add certain features that you think people might not like or have a debate around. So yes, we have to play it safe, but also, challenge for designers from landlords is, how can you push the boundaries slightly? So I think that will help save us slightly from the vanilla spaces, but of course, you are still designing for the unknown, designing for someone who you don't know, what the needs are, and again, putting certain colors. I was working with a company previously, Nikon, and their color is yellow, and we introduced a couple of red things in our space just as accent colors, and we've been told not to because Canon is their the direct competitors. So you need to be very careful in the use of colors and what features you add in the space to make sure you're not offending, you're trying to attract. So yeah, keep it generic, but also we always like to add features in the space that it makes or breaks the space. So, but you've got to be careful how you handle it.
Yeah, Katrina, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree with Mae, and it's, we are asked a lot, how do we do this but make our space look different? What you don't want to see is certain companies rolling out the exact same fit out across their portfolio, because people want to feel like it's their space. That's the benefit of not going to the flexible office or, a service provider, apart from the fact that many people don't want to share meeting rooms and collaboration space now. They want their own identity, and so we have to help provide that.
Okay, thanks. We touched on this just before the end of the chat there, but Michael Harrison had asked, do the panel foresee this trend growing across the UK market? We did a quick poll there with our attendees, and about 80% were coming back to say, yes, they can see this growing and giving stiff competition to traditional leases and serviced offices. Do you want to add anything to that, Katrina?
I agree with them. As I said previously, I do think we'll see more of it, particularly with more tenant space coming back. less people wanting to be in serviced offices just because they want their own identity. And following COVID, I think people feel better about securing their own space. Their staff will feel safer in their own building. I don't see this dwindling anytime soon.
I think Katrina, you touched on it earlier on about the growth in grey space, sublet space that's happening across the country. And I think I read that there's 70% of emerging grey space is 10,000 square foot or less, which is sort of prime competition, for these sort of size floor plates that we're referring to around Cat A+. So it's giving kind of further incentive really to landlords that they really need to try and do something to really help sell these vacant floor spaces. Yeah,
agreed. And I think that's why even more time is spent on the design, working with people like me to make sure they're catering to people's specific tastes. Yes, there's an element of the office being generic, but I think we do need to add elements to make it feel like it's personal to someone. And now people are encouraging that a lot more.
Thank you. Chris Cuthbert asked, Katrina, has there been any evidence in the London markets thus far on yield shifts when it comes to the Cat A+ elements within a building? Appreciate evidence will be light, but what are your investment and research colleagues crystal balling here? Presumably it's primarily the funds that are triggering these initiatives.
Well, firstly, I'll caveat this by saying I don't work on the investment side. The most recent sales in London all seem to be going significantly well, particularly in the West End, of trophy buildings. I would say a lot of them already have traditional occupiers. So I don't know if there's any recent sales where the majority of the building has been fitted out to Cat A+ when I think of the most recent sales, but I will find out for you.
Yeah, that's maybe a question that we can come back and answer to the group after the session.
Okay. Question from Stuart McMillan. Is there a model lifespan for the Cat A+ fit out elements from both a design, market trend and performance perspective? Mae, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one because it does vary from one landlord to the other and how they see the leases working. But if we say that when we design any space for a Cat B, let's say, we usually work on a lifespan of, dependent on the lease, 5 to 10 years. I don't see that the Cat A+ should be any different. Of course, we get the shorter leases with a break. So you get the tenant moving out in a couple of years, in 3 years' time, and they, the landlord will have to do some works. That work could involve maybe replacing the carpet to make sure it's up to trend, or actually, if there is wear and tear, evident wear and tear, you don't want a new tenant to move into a space that looks a little bit grubby. But from a specification perspective, I would say we design for the 5 to 10 year, that's standard, 5 to 10 year lease, where the landlord doesn't have to redo the whole space. And again, the sustainability kind of comes in play as well, because you don't want a space that is in a couple of years' time taken all down and rebuilt all over again. So I think that we need to be mindful of. But yes, the trends do vary, the trends do change, and the look and feel does change. But with simple solutions, when a tenant moves out, bringing in a different material on the floor, let's say, can help just change the look and feel of the space and make it survive for longer, or stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm. Katrina, would you agree with that?
Yes, completely. I mean, I don't get involved much other than giving input on what the furniture looks like. So Mae's much better equipped to comment on its lifespan.
Okay, thanks. And then Robert Hartley has asked, what levels of technology typically are in a standard fit out?
Right.
What would you say, Mae? Sorry.
If we're thinking technology as in, your USB chargers at your desk, USB-C chargers at your desk, plug and play is the big word for the Cat A+. It needs to feel like a plug and play space where you don't have to do too much to actually be able to take your computer and sit and work. And Katrina, you touched on the IT side of it as well, where it's very important for the space to have to have the connectivity. I think we can't really do much without connectivity. So having the space connect with Wi-Fi, equipped with Wi-Fi ready, and presenting itself, you know, everywhere you can sit, you can actually plug your laptop, charge it, and play. Sometimes we get asked for monitors, so sometimes we put monitors in, so almost docking stations and monitors where somebody can come in literally with a laptop and they have a screen, they have a whole setup ready for them. It depends on what level of detail the landlord wants to go through, but there are basics that we cannot go below, and that would be, you know, consider a plug and play space. What would you put in to enable a plug and play space? That's what we always put in as a standard.
One of the features that we've seen is the landlords giving the occupier the ability to control the speed of the connectivity, so that actually prior to them coming in, they can actually set the speed that they want, and there's obviously a cost upcharge that's associated with that. So that's definitely one. And again, it's giving that flexibility to the occupier that when they come in. In terms of AV, Katrina or Mae, I mean, do you see much in the way of that at all? Is there much of an AV spec that you see going into meeting rooms?
Yeah, we definitely specify whether the landlord is happy to bring the TV day one, or this is more of a tenant item to bring in later on. But we definitely allow for the infrastructure for AV. In meeting rooms and video conferencing as well. Make sure that the furniture is smart enough and has got the connectivity. So then you can, again, plug and play. So when you are in a meeting room, you can throw something up the screen, and that definitely is something that becomes part of the brief for us.
Thank you. Peter Fraser asks, from a standing start, on average, how long does it take to deliver a Cat A+ suite from the point the client decides to progress down that route? Again,
it depends on the size of the space. If we're saying that the average size is sub 5,000 square feet, it could be anything between 4 to 6 weeks on site, and potentially 3 to 4 weeks from a design perspective to develop the designs and get it ready. So it's a very quick process, and I think that's the beauty of it, and that's the selling point. You can get it from 0 to 100 quite quickly. Within a couple of months, you could have your 2,500 square foot space designed and fitted. Order furniture in advance, and probably, David, you might want to shed some lights on that as well, because furniture is very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's typically the sort of the smaller lead times. I mean, you can get furniture that you could have on a sort of 2 to 4 week lead time. You're limited to what you can have there, and often you're limited in terms of quality as well. Typically, you're sort of talking 6 to 8 weeks. So that kind of ties in quite nicely then with the length of the design and everything else.
Yeah.
And a final question from our Alex McRae. Have you also seen the retail property market adopting Cat A+, given 2020's impact on the sector?
Well, I read a very interesting article. I haven't seen it myself. We're not retail designers, but I've read a very interesting article around that a lot of retail units, landlords are actually thinking of changing them into social hubs for people working from home to go in and plug and play and sit down with other people. But again, it's local, it's within your local high street. So that's as much as my information goes on this particular topic, but I found that very, very exciting actually, and very interesting to have those social hubs within each and every town.
Yeah, I think the relaxation in the change of use code in September has allowed many landlords to reposition the space they've got. I haven't personally been involved in much retail, but I am looking for an office for a property company just now. And when we struggled to find something, from October, we started looking at restaurant space where the occupier's gone bust. Actually, those landlords were willing to take an office rent as opposed to the restaurant rent, which had been higher, because there was no future. Well, they couldn't see the end in sight for the void periods if it was kept as a restaurant space. So there's definitely people looking at many more different uses for different space now.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mae. I've read similar articles about what they're doing around retail spaces and looking at how they can innovate and sort of reinvigor retail spaces into a lot of these kind of social collaborative hubs. We're actually working on a really interesting one at the moment with a rugby club who are actually converting their rugby club into a co-working space to try and bring some revenue in when a lot of these local clubs are not seeing any revenue coming in right now. So so I think hopefully that's going to be a real positive thing that's come out of the pandemic, is that there are those that are out there that are really looking to redefine the use of a lot of the vacant spaces that they've got at the moment.
Yeah, you've got to be smart about it. You've got to think outside the box. That's what we're all trying to do at this particular strange year.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's taken us almost up to 10 o'clock. We've answered the questions that have come in. We are going to send on the recording of the webinar to all of you, and please feel free to come back with any questions for us or for Mae or Katrina, and we'll make sure to pass those on. So just like to say a final thank you very much to Katrina Love and Mae Fahzi for joining us this morning, and thank you to all of you as well for joining us and for sending in your questions. If you don't mind taking a moment just to answer the survey at the end, then I think that's us. Dave, anything further to add?
No, just to say thanks very much everyone for attending. We will be following up in the new year with a more comprehensive report around Cat A+. Yeah, we'll be sending out information around that sometime in the new year. But yeah, no, thank you very much everyone, and yeah, hope you all have a lovely Christmas.
Thank you. Thanks guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.